On the morning of the ranch auction, Clara found a fresh grave behind Ethan Cole's barn. There was no name on the wooden marker, only the date her husband had supposedly died 30 miles away. In the mud beside it lay the broken clasp from the document case she had been searching for since his funeral. Ethan wanted to call the sheriff, but Clara stopped him. The sheriff was already standing at the auction beside the man who claimed to own everything. By noon, the ranch would be sold. Before sunset, Clara intended to prove that the dead man in that grave had known who forged the will. The auctioneer raised his hammer above the scarred wooden table as rain struck the roof of the Red Hollow meeting hall. Ethan Cole stood at the back, silent beneath the eyes of neighbors who had come to watch his family ranch pass into another man's hands. Silas Vale already wore the satisfied look of an owner. Then the doors flew open. Clara Vale entered in a black mourning dress, soaked to the knees. Mud covered her boots, but she walked straight through the crowd without lowering her head. Her 8-year-old daughter followed, clutching a small wooden box against her chest. The widow everyone had called a thief placed a sealed envelope beneath the auctioneer's raised hammer. Its silver mark caught the lamplight. The will being used to sell Cole Ranch was a forgery. The true will was inside that envelope, together with proof that the debt had been invented and a dead man's signature copied. Silas stared at the wooden box. The lawyer beside the sheriff went pale. Clara lifted one trembling hand and pointed toward them. The man who had forged her husband's will was standing inside the room. 3 weeks earlier, Clara Vale stood at the back of her husband's study, while men she had known for years decided she no longer belonged there. Nathan had been buried that morning. The mud on the mourner's boots had not dried, yet Silas Vale already sat in his brother's chair as if death had transferred the house to him. Clara kept 8-year-old Lucy close. The child had not cried since the funeral. She only held her mother's hand and watched every adult in the room, trying to understand which faces could still be trusted. Horace Bell, the family lawyer, unfolded a document and read Nathan's final wishes. According to the paper, Silas inherited the ranch, livestock, house, and every account connected to the Vale name. Clara received nothing. Lucy received nothing. Even the eastern pasture Nathan had promised his daughter now belonged to Silas. Clara listened until Horace reached the final page. Then she saw what was missing. Nathan sealed every important document with a silver stamp engraved with a running stag. The seal was absent. The date was wrong as well. The will claimed Nathan had signed it on September 14th, but Clara remembered that day clearly. Nathan had been in Miles City, meeting cattle buyers. She stepped forward and pointed out the mistake. Horace did not examine the date. Silas did not request another copy. Instead, they accused Clara of stealing a document case from Nathan's study and planning to produce a false will. Silas said Nathan had regretted marrying a woman with no fortune, no influential family, and no value to the ranch. Clara did not answer with tears. She asked only where Lucy was expected to live. Silas looked at the child and said her future was no longer the Vale family's responsibility. By sunset, Clara's dresses, Lucy's books, and one battered suitcase had been left on the porch. The relatives who had eaten at her table watched from behind the windows as she tied the suitcase shut. Silas allowed Lucy to keep her coat. That small mercy troubled Clara. As they walked away, she noticed one of Silas's hired men watching the coat instead of the suitcase. Another rider appeared near the cottonwoods before disappearing behind the hill. Clara left the main road and led Lucy across harvested fields until the Vale house vanished from sight. Beneath an abandoned wagon shelter, she examined the coat. The lining near the shoulder had been stitched with thread that did not match the original seam. Clara broke it open with a bent hairpin. Inside was half of a folded document wrapped in oilcloth. A silver seal marked one corner. It did not bear the Vale stag. It showed a horse standing before a mountain. Clara had seen that symbol on a letter Nathan kept beneath his account books. It belonged to Samuel Cole, the late owner of Cole Ranch. Nathan had once told her that Samuel's son Ethan was one of the few men in Red Hollow who could not be bribed or frightened into signing what he had not read. The torn page mentioned an eastern boundary, a protected spring, and a promise that would survive the deaths of both men. Lucy asked whether they were still a family now that the house was gone. Clara folded the paper and returned it to the hidden pocket. Everything else had been taken from them, but Silas would not take the answer to that question. They were still a family. Near dusk, hoofbeats sounded behind them. 2 riders followed the wagon road, moving slowly enough to avoid suspicion. Clara understood that Silas had not cast them out simply to be rid of them. He believed Nathan had hidden something with his wife or daughter, and he intended to recover it before they found anyone willing to listen. Clara lifted the suitcase, took Lucy's hand, and turned north toward Cole Ranch. She did not know whether Ethan Cole would open his door, but Nathan had named him before he died, and the riders behind her were getting closer. By the time Clara saw the lights of Cole Ranch, the rain had turned cold enough to sting her face. Lucy stumbled beside her, one hand gripping Clara's fingers and the other pressed against the hidden paper inside her coat. The riders had vanished behind the hills, but every gust of wind still sounded like hoofbeats. Only one lamp burned inside the ranch house. Clara climbed the porch steps and knocked. Ethan Cole opened the door holding an oil lamp. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a worn work shirt. His quiet face belonged to a man accustomed to hardship. He looked at Clara, then at the trembling child beside her. Clara asked for one night of shelter. She offered to work for their food. She did not ask for money or sympathy. Lucy swayed from exhaustion. Ethan stepped aside. He added wood to the stove, wrapped Lucy in a wool blanket, and heated 2 bowls of soup. When Clara remained standing, he told her they could discuss work in the morning. That night, she and the child needed to eat. He asked no questions about the accusations against her. He did not stare at the mud on her dress or the bruise around her wrist. He showed them an upstairs room and promised no one would enter without permission. Lucy fell asleep within minutes. Clara stayed awake, listening to the rain and Ethan moving through the rooms below. She had expected suspicion. Instead, he gave her time. At dawn, she found him repairing a gate. Clara offered to cook, clean, mend clothes, tend chickens, or keep records. Ethan said she and Lucy could stay for 7 days. She would receive wages, meals, and the upstairs room in exchange for work. It was not charity. That mattered to her. Walter Pike, the ranch manager, arrived from the barn. He had worked for the Cole family since Ethan's father was alive. His expression hardened when he heard Clara's last name. Walter warned Ethan that the Vale widow had been accused of theft. He said the ranch was already burdened by debt and could not afford another mouth to feed. Ethan answered calmly. Clara had asked for work, not ownership, and anyone who worked on Cole land would be paid fairly. Walter left, but not before looking carefully at Lucy's coat. Later, Clara hung the damp garment near the stove. The torn document slipped from its hidden seam and fell to the floor. Ethan picked it up. The silver seal showed a horse standing before a mountain. His expression changed. The seal had belonged to his father, Samuel Cole. Clara explained where she had found the paper. Nathan had once mentioned Ethan's name, but she did not know why the document connected their families. Only part of the writing remained. It mentioned an eastern boundary, a protected spring, and an agreement that could not be broken by sale or inheritance. Walter entered and saw the seal. Fear crossed his face before he quickly dismissed the paper as worthless and walked away. That night, Ethan searched the office his father had once used. The lock on the bottom desk drawer had been scratched. The old water agreements were gone. Someone had searched the room before Clara ever reached his door. Ethan did not confront Walter the next morning. Instead, he carried the remaining papers from his father's desk into the kitchen and placed them before Clara. The oldest agreements were brittle at the edges, but Samuel Cole's signature appeared clearly on every page. Clara studied them beside the torn document from Lucy's coat. She had kept records for her father's freight business before marrying Nathan. Later, Nathan trusted her to check cattle receipts and household accounts whenever the numbers did not balance. She had never called herself an expert, but she understood how honest records were supposed to behave. The signature on Ethan's current debt papers did not behave honestly. Samuel's real hand ended the name Cole with a short upward stroke. On the debt agreement, the final letter curved downward as if someone had copied the shape without understanding how his hand moved. Clara placed the 2 pages together. The signatures looked alike from a distance. Up close, one belonged to Samuel Cole. The other belonged to a man pretending to be him. Ethan remained silent for a long moment. The debt against his ranch had existed since before his father's death. He had paid interest on it for years because Walter assured him Samuel had borrowed money during a difficult winter. Clara asked to see the ranch ledgers. Walter objected when he found them at the office table. He said Clara had already been accused of stealing records from the Vale family and had no right to examine Cole accounts. Ethan did not raise his voice. He told Walter that Clara was working for the ranch, and he had asked for her help. Walter left, but the anger in his face remained. Clara worked through the afternoon. She found freight charges entered twice, cattle sales recorded below market price, and payments sent to a company called Red Basin Holdings. The name stopped her. Nathan had once shown her an invoice from the same company. Silas claimed it belonged to a distant buyer, but the mailing address led to Horace Bell's law office in Red Hollow. Ethan checked the figures himself. 60 cattle had been sold the previous spring. The ranch received payment for only 42. Another page had been replaced with newer paper. The ink was darker, and the stitching near the spine had been cut and sewn again. Someone had altered the ledger after the sale. Walter returned near sunset. He dismissed the missing money as a bookkeeping error and said Ethan's father had often made arrangements no one else understood. Clara looked at him and asked why a bookkeeping error carried the address of Silas Vale's lawyer. Walter had no answer. After he left, Clara admitted that Nathan had been investigating Silas before his death. He believed someone inside Cole Ranch was helping move cattle, hide payments, and create debt on land Silas wanted to buy. Nathan had promised to tell her the name when he returned from his final trip. He never returned alive. That night, Lucy woke when horses moved outside the house. She sat upright and asked whether they were safe now. Clara could not answer. Ethan heard the question from the hallway. He did not enter the room. He carried a chair onto the porch and stayed there beneath the cold moon, where he could see the road and the barn. He offered no grand promise. He simply remained. If you believe Clara is hiding the truth for a reason, share your thoughts in the comments. Near midnight, Clara returned to the ledger. Beneath the false page, she found a narrow strip of older paper caught inside the binding. The handwriting belonged to Nathan. It contained only one warning. If they sell Cole Ranch, they will control all the water. By sunrise, Clara had copied Nathan's warning onto a clean sheet of paper and placed it beside the old agreements from Samuel Cole's desk. The words changed everything. Cole Ranch was not valuable only because of its grazing land. Beneath the northern ridge ran a protected spring that fed the eastern pastures, the Vale boundary, and several smaller ranches beyond Red Hollow. If Silas gained control of Cole land, he could control who received water when the dry season came. Ethan studied the faded maps while Clara compared them with cattle records. The missing money was no longer a collection of careless mistakes. It was part of a plan. The ranch had been weakened slowly through false freight charges, stolen livestock, and debt that Samuel Cole had never signed. Clara counted every animal listed in the spring sales. 60 cattle had left the ranch, but only 42 appeared in the final payment. The remaining 18 were recorded again 3 weeks later under the name of Red Basin Holdings. A shipping receipt carried the Vale mark beside a badly altered Cole brand. Ethan rode south with 2 workers and found 3 of the missing animals mixed into a Vale herd waiting near the rail station. The proof was no longer hidden only in ink. Someone had stolen directly from Cole Ranch. Walter blamed the confusion on careless drovers. Clara asked why careless men had delivered the cattle to a company connected to Horace Bell. Walter refused to answer. That afternoon, Clara walked the northern fence with Lucy while Ethan inspected the returned animals. Near the narrow ravine, she found several iron pins resting loose inside their wooden posts. They had not rusted free. Someone had lifted them by hand and placed them back without securing them. A hard wind was expected before midnight. If the fence fell, the herd would scatter into the ravine or cross onto Vale land. Ethan would lose enough cattle to make the auction unavoidable. Clara showed him the loose pins. Walter insisted there was no time to rebuild the entire line. Clara did not ask for an entire rebuild. She marked the weakest posts, moved the youngest cattle south, and organized the workers into pairs. Before darkness, the dangerous section was reinforced. The storm struck after midnight. Wind tore one old post from the ground and flattened 100 feet of neglected fence farther west. But the reinforced line held. The herd remained safely inside the lower pasture. By morning, even the men who had called Clara trouble were waiting for her instructions. She did not celebrate. She moved from one problem to the next. She reorganized the feed room after discovering sacks spoiled by moisture. She treated a fevered mare with cool water, clean cloth, and the patience to remain beside the animal until it drank. She calculated that selling a small group of older steers before the mountain road froze would cover winter supplies without reducing the breeding herd. Each decision saved a little money. Together, They gave the ranch time. Ethan began leaving the ledgers open when Clara entered the office. One evening, she found a second chair placed across from his desk. He did not explain it. He no longer expected her to stand while they discussed the ranch. Walter noticed the chair as well. His authority had once rested on Ethan's trust and the confusion inside the accounts. Clara had taken both away without raising her voice. Near dusk, Walter saddled his horse and rode toward town, claiming he needed new fencing nails. He did not return that night. The next morning, Lucy found his coat hanging behind a stall door. Inside one pocket was a receipt from Red Basin Holdings. The amount matched the missing cattle payment. At the bottom of the page was Horace Bell's signature. On the reverse side, written in Walter's hand, were 4 words: auction confirmed. Widow still here. After Walter disappeared, Cole Ranch grew quieter. Not peaceful exactly. Too many questions remained. But without Walter watching every doorway, Clara began to notice the smaller sounds of the ranch. The stove crackling before dawn. Lucy laughing near the corral. Ethan crossing the porch while the house still slept. Each morning, a cup of coffee waited beside the ledgers. Ethan never said it was for her. He simply placed it near the chair across from his desk. The coffee was always hot and softened with the little sugar the ranch could spare. One evening, Clara found his winter coat hanging beside the back door. The elbow was torn and the shoulder seam had opened. She repaired it after Lucy fell asleep. She left the worn leather patch untouched. When Ethan found the coat, he ran his fingers over the new stitches. The patch had come from his father's old riding coat. Clara had understood without being told. He wore it that day. Later, Ethan took Lucy to the pasture behind the barn. A gentle chestnut pony named Maple waited beside the fence. Lucy wanted to ride, but fear kept her several steps away. Ethan did not lift her into the saddle. He showed her how to offer an open hand and waited while she touched the pony's nose, mane, and saddle. Only when Lucy nodded did he help her place one boot in the stirrup. Clara watched from the gate. Ethan did not tell frightened people what they should feel. He gave them time to choose courage for themselves. Lucy rode one slow circle, then another. Her laughter crossed the pasture so brightly that Clara had to look away. She could not remember the last time her daughter had sounded like a child. A few days later, Ethan cut his palm while repairing the barn door. Clara removed the dirty cloth he had wrapped around it, washed the wound, and tied clean linen around his hand. Neither spoke. His hand was rough and warm beneath hers. He remained still, careful not to turn the moment into something she was not ready to name. That night, rain moved across the ranch. Clara was checking the mare when hoofbeats sounded beyond the yard. She froze. The lantern trembled in her hand, and for one instant, she was back on the road with Silas's riders behind her. Ethan entered the barn but did not touch her. He sat several feet away and listened until the sound passed. It was only a ranch hand returning from town. Clara admitted that she had forgotten what it felt like to be spoken to gently. Ethan said a person could live without kindness for a long time, but the cost never stopped growing. He told her about his younger brother, Daniel, who had taken dangerous mine work to help repay one of Samuel Cole's supposed debts. Daniel never came home. Ethan had spent years blaming himself for not discovering the truth sooner. Clara understood why Ethan read every paper twice and trusted actions more than promises. Neither spoke of love. Still, the house had begun to change. Lucy left her books on the kitchen table. Clara's shawl hung beside Ethan's coat. 3 plates appeared at supper without discussion. Clara continued hiding Nathan's blood-stained envelope beneath her dresses. She feared what it contained and what opening it might bring to Ethan's door. One morning, she found the envelope on his desk. Ethan had discovered it while moving her suitcase away from a leaking window. He had seen the dried blood and the silver edge beneath the fold. He had not opened it. He returned it to Clara and said it belonged to her. That simple act broke the final piece of distrust she had carried into his house. Clara almost told him everything. Before she could speak, hoofbeats thundered toward the ranch. 4 riders approached the gate. Silas Vale rode at the front. Horace Bell carried a leather document case beside him. Sheriff Amos Reed followed behind them, and in Horace's hand was an order bearing Clara's full name. Silas stopped his horse outside the gate, as if Cole Ranch already belonged to him. Horace Bell waited beside him with a leather document case. Sheriff Amos Reed rode several paces behind, looking uneasy. Walter Pike was nowhere in sight. Ethan walked into the yard and closed the gate between them. He did not reach for a weapon or raise his voice. He simply asked why they had come. Horace removed an order bearing Clara's full name. He claimed it authorized the sheriff to take her to Red Hollow for questioning over the theft of Nathan Vale's will, account books, and property records. Silas said Clara had used stolen papers to interfere with Cole Ranch business. He called her a desperate widow searching for another lonely man to protect her. Clara stood on the porch with Lucy behind her. Silas ordered her to cross the gate. She did not move. Horace produced a second paper and warned that the Vale family would seek custody of Lucy if Clara refused to cooperate. A woman accused of theft, he said, was unfit to raise a child. Lucy gripped her mother's skirt. Clara could survive being called a thief. She could survive losing her home. But the threat against her daughter nearly stole her voice. Ethan stepped in front of the porch, yet he did not speak for her. He turned and asked what she wanted to do. The question steadied Clara. She said she would not leave until the order had been examined. Ethan asked to see it. When Horace refused, he told Sheriff Amos to read it aloud. The order claimed Judge William Mercer had signed it 2 days earlier. Ethan knew the judge had left Red Hollow the previous week for a hearing in Helena. The paper also carried a clerk's stamp, but no raised court seal. Ethan asked whether a lawful order involving a child could be issued without that seal. Horace said the court had been in a hurry. Ethan replied that men might hurry, but official seals did not disappear. Amos examined the signature again. It resembled Judge Mercer's name, but the final stroke ended too sharply. Instead of returning the paper to Horace, the sheriff folded it and placed it inside his coat. Silas's expression hardened. He warned that the bank would auction Cole Ranch in 4 days. By protecting Clara, Ethan was sacrificing land his family had held for generations. Ethan looked at him through the closed gate. Silas had come with false paper to frighten a woman and threaten a child. Until the order was verified, no one would enter. Silas called Clara a burden who had already destroyed one family. Ethan remained still. If Silas had come for trouble, he had found it. If he had come for Clara, he would leave disappointed. The strength in Ethan's words came not from anger, but from certainty. Sheriff Amos announced there would be no arrest until he checked the court register. Horace protested, but the sheriff had already turned his horse. Silas looked past Ethan toward Clara. He promised to return with an order no one could question. Then he warned that Lucy would learn what happened to children whose mothers refused the law. Clara stepped forward. She told Silas that threatening a child would never make forged papers true. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. He rode away with Horace. If you believe Ethan was right to risk his ranch rather than surrender Clara, share your thoughts in the comments. You may also share this story with someone who believes courage can be quiet. After the riders disappeared, Ethan and Clara searched Walter's room. It had been cleared. Several transport ledgers and cattle receipts were missing. The drawer containing Ethan's bank notices stood open. Lucy found one printed sheet beneath the bed. It announced the auction of Cole Ranch. The printer's date was 6 weeks old. The bank had informed Ethan of foreclosure only 12 days earlier. The auction had been arranged before the debt was officially declared unpaid. Ethan did not ride after Silas or search for Walter with a rifle. The men threatening Clara had come with documents, so he decided the truth would defeat them through evidence. Before noon, he rode to Red Hollow with Clara. Sheriff Amos Reed met them inside his office, where the false order lay open across the desk. The court register contained no request for Clara's arrest and no petition concerning Lucy. Judge Mercer had signed nothing before leaving for Helena. Amos admitted Horace Bell had delivered the order only an hour before they rode to Cole Ranch. Horace claimed the official seal had broken and promised to provide a certified copy later. The sheriff had believed him because Horace prepared legal papers for half the county. Clara understood how the fraud had survived. Horace did not create lies that looked unusual. He hid them among familiar documents, and trusted, respectable men would be too embarrassed to question him. Ethan asked Amos to preserve the false order. He also showed him the auction notice Lucy had found beneath Walter's bed. Its printing date proved someone had arranged the sale weeks before the bank declared the debt unpaid. Amos agreed the papers were suspicious, but they still needed proof that the debt itself had been forged. Clara told them about Jonas Price. Jonas had worked as Nathan's clerk. He copied contracts, witnessed signatures, and once warned Clara never to trust a document Horace brought into the Vale house alone. If Nathan had written another will, Jonas would know. They found his rented room above the feed store empty. A chair had been overturned, papers covered the floor, and the mattress had been cut open. Someone had searched for something small enough to hide. Jonas's coat remained beside the door. He had not planned to leave. Clara noticed one leg of the desk was shorter than the others. A folded scrap of paper had been pushed beneath it. 4 words were written across it. Samuel's Chapel. Beneath the prayer. Ethan recognized the place. His father had built a small family chapel on the hill after Ethan's mother died. Samuel once said, "A bank vault protected paper from ordinary thieves, but a place of prayer protected it from greedy men who never entered unless they wished to be admired." They reached the chapel before sunset. Dust covered the benches. Wind passed through a broken window, carrying the smell of pine and approaching snow. Ethan examined the wooden rail where his father used to kneel. One board concealed a small iron hinge. Beneath it rested a metal box. Inside was a copy of the water agreement between Samuel Cole and Nathan's father. It stated that the protected spring could never be sold separately from the Eastern Vale pasture. If either family lost its land through fraud or forced sale, the agreement would pass to Nathan's lawful heir. The final page was missing. Without it, they could prove the agreement existed, but not who inherited its protection. A sealed letter from Samuel remained inside the box. The letter named Lucy. Samuel had ordered that if both he and Nathan were dead, the water rights must be protected for Nathan's child until she reached adulthood. Ethan could guard the agreement, but he could never claim the land for himself. Nathan had trusted the Cole family with Lucy's future long before Clara reached Ethan's door. Ethan placed the letter in her hands. It belonged to Lucy. Clara finally removed Nathan's blood-stained envelope from beneath her dress. Nathan had placed it inside Lucy's coat on the morning of his final journey. He had warned Clara not to open it unless she found Samuel Cole's seal. Inside was a small brass key and one sentence in Nathan's handwriting. The original rests where the dead cannot be forced to lie. Ethan understood. Nathan's memorial stone in Red Hollow Cemetery contained a bronze compartment for written prayers and family remembrances. The key would open it. They finally knew where the true will had been hidden. When they returned to the sheriff's office, Amos had more news. Jonas Price had been seen leaving town inside Walter Pike's wagon. The wagon was heading toward the cemetery. Clara, Ethan, and Sheriff Amos reached Red Hollow Cemetery just before darkness settled over the hills. Walter's wagon stood near the stone wall with one wheel sunk in the mud. The horse remained tied to a cedar tree, breathing hard as if it had been driven without rest. There was no sign of Walter. A low sound came from behind the caretaker's shed. Ethan found Jonas Price lying beside a stack of old boards with his hands tied. He was bruised, but alive. Walter had forced him into the wagon after searching his room, demanding to know where Nathan had hidden the original will. Jonas had refused to tell him. Walter abandoned him when he heard riders approaching and escaped through the trees on horseback. Sheriff Amos cut the ropes while Clara hurried toward Nathan's memorial stone. The bronze compartment was set into the back of the marker beneath a carved branch of laurel. Clara's hands shook as she placed the brass key into the lock. For one moment, it would not turn. Rainwater and dirt had settled inside the mechanism. Ethan covered her hand with his only long enough to steady the key. He did not take it from her. Clara turned it again. The lock opened. Inside the narrow chamber rested a metal tube wrapped in dark cloth. The fabric carried a faded stain that matched the blood on Nathan's envelope. Clara removed the cap. The true will was inside. Nathan's silver stag seal remained unbroken at the bottom of the final page. His signature appeared beside the names of 2 witnesses. One was Jonas Price. The other was a traveling minister who had passed through Red Hollow 3 months earlier. Jonas confirmed that he had watched Nathan sign the document in full possession of his judgment. Nathan had rewritten the will after discovering that Silas was moving Cole cattle through Red Basin Holdings and working with Horace Bell to manufacture debt against both ranches. The will left Clara the Vale house and enough money to raise Lucy without depending on Silas. More importantly, it named Lucy as the lawful heir to the Eastern Vale pasture and every water right attached to it. The final page referred directly to Samuel Cole's agreement. The protected spring could not be controlled by either family alone. Cole Ranch and Lucy's inheritance were bound together so the water would remain available to every smaller ranch named in the original contract. Silas had never wanted only Ethan's land. He wanted the power to decide which families received water and which families would be forced to sell. Nathan had included a written statement with the will. He described payments moving from Red Basin Holdings to Walter Pike and Horace Bell. He also warned that his brother had threatened him when he refused to sell Lucy's inheritance. The last paragraph was more disturbing. Nathan wrote that if he died in a wagon accident, the axle should be examined before any repairs were made. He believed someone had already tried to loosen it once. Jonas lowered his eyes. He admitted that Walter had been inside the Vale carriage barn on the morning Nathan died. Jonas had seen him kneeling near the rear wheel. Walter claimed he was checking a damaged brake, but the wagon had shown no brake trouble before that day. Sheriff Amos gathered the documents carefully. The true will proved fraud and attempted theft. Jonas's testimony connected Horace to the false will and Walter to the altered records. Nathan's statement gave Amos cause to investigate the death as more than an accident. But Clara knew Silas would deny everything unless the evidence was presented where he could not hide from it. The ranch auction would begin the following morning. Ethan suggested taking the will directly to the territorial judge. Clara shook her head. By the time they reached Helena, Cole Ranch would already be sold, and Silas would claim the documents had been created after the auction. They needed to stop the sale in front of the bank representative, the sheriff, the auctioneer, and the same townspeople who had watched Clara lose her home. Sheriff Amos agreed to keep the will under official protection overnight. He would issue an order for Walter's arrest and bring Jonas to the auction as a witness. Clara kept Samuel's letter and Nathan's sealed statement. Ethan asked whether she was certain she wanted to face Silas publicly. Clara looked toward Nathan's grave. For weeks, men had spoken about her as though she had no voice. They had called her useless, dishonest, and unfit to raise her own child. They had expected her to hide while they used Nathan's name to steal from the living. She would not hide again. She would walk into the auction herself. She would place the true will on the table before the hammer fell. Ethan did not promise to speak for her. He promised to stand beside her while she spoke for herself. As they left the cemetery, Sheriff Amos warned that Silas had already spread word through town. Clara would be arrested the moment she entered the auction hall. Clara closed her hand around Nathan's letter. By morning, every person in Red Hollow would have to decide which they trusted more. A widow they had judged without hearing, or the respectable men whose signatures were beginning to fall apart. The auction hall was already full when Clara entered. Rain struck the roof while ranchers crowded the benches and men from the bank waited near the front table. Horace Bell stood beside Silas with a stack of documents. Ethan remained near the back wall, exactly where Clara had first seen him when the hammer was raised. Lucy walked beside her, carrying the wooden box. Silas spoke first. He called Clara a thief who had stolen family records and created a false will after Nathan's death. He demanded that Sheriff Amos arrest her before she interfered with the sale. Amos did not move. He told Clara to present what she had brought. She placed Nathan's sealed statement on the table. Her hands were steady. She began with the order Horace had carried to Cole Ranch. Sheriff Amos confirmed that no request for Clara's arrest or petition concerning Lucy appeared in the court register. Judge Mercer had been in Helena on the date beside his signature, and the required court seal had never been applied. Horace called it an administrative error. Clara then placed Ethan's debt agreement beside 3 older papers bearing Samuel Cole's true signature. She showed how the final stroke in the forged name curved downward, while Samuel's hand always moved upward. The bank representative compared them and asked who had prepared the debt paper. Horace blamed Walter Pike. Clara opened the ranch ledger. She showed cattle sold under the Cole name, payments diverted through Red Basin Holdings, and freight charges entered twice. The receipt from Walter's coat matched the missing payment and carried Horace Bell's signature. Horace claimed someone had copied his name. Then Jonas Price entered under the sheriff's protection. Jonas stated that he had witnessed Nathan sign a new will. Horace later offered him money to replace the final page with another document naming Silas as sole heir. Jonas refused. After Nathan died, Walter searched his room and forced him into a wagon to learn where the original had been hidden. Clara opened the wooden box. Inside lay the true will. Nathan's silver stag seal remained unbroken. Jonas's signature appeared beside that of a traveling minister. The bank representative confirmed that Silas had no legal authority over Clara's home or Lucy's inheritance. Lucy was the lawful heir to the Eastern Vale pasture and the water rights connected to Cole Ranch. Silas struck the table and declared the agreement did not exist. Ethan stepped forward with Samuel's letter. Clara added the torn document from Lucy's coat and the matching section recovered from the chapel. When the two halves were joined, the silver Cole seal became whole. The agreement was real. It also protected several smaller ranches whose owners were sitting inside the hall. Silas had planned to control the spring, cut water to the surrounding land, and buy every desperate ranch for almost nothing. The men who had come to watch Ethan lose his property realized they had nearly lost their own. Horace tried to leave. Sheriff Amos blocked the door. Walter was brought in through the side entrance with his wrists restrained. He had been captured near the rail station before dawn. At first, he refused to speak. Then Silas declared that Walter had acted alone. Walter looked at him and began to confess. Silas had paid him to move coal cattle through Red Basin Holdings, alter the ledgers, remove Samuel's water agreements, and create a false debt. Horace had prepared the forged will and the false court order. Walter also admitted he had loosened the axle on Nathan's wagon. Silas had claimed the damage would only frighten Nathan into silence. The wagon overturned on the mountain road. Nathan never came home. Clara closed her eyes but remained standing. Ethan stayed near enough to help if she asked, yet he did not take away her strength by assuming she needed him. Sheriff Amos arrested Horace for forgery, fraud, and misuse of court authority. Silas was arrested for conspiracy, theft, attempted seizure of property, and his role in Nathan's death. Walter was taken into custody for carrying out the sabotage. The auctioneer lowered his hammer without striking the table. The sale was canceled. The bank representative declared the coal debt invalid pending review. Money held through Red Basin Holdings would be frozen and returned to the families from whom it had been taken. No one cheered. Justice sounded quieter than celebration. It was forged papers being gathered as evidence. It was powerful men leaving through the same doors they had expected Clara to be dragged through. It was the silence of neighbors who had called her useless without asking what she knew. If this moment of truth moved you, share the story with someone who believes dignity can survive cruel judgment. Save the video and subscribe for more stories in which patience, courage, and kindness bring hidden injustice into the light. Ethan faced the crowd. He said Coal Ranch still stood because Clara had read what others ignored, questioned what others accepted, and refused to surrender the truth. Clara looked at the people who had once watched her belongings placed in the rain. She did not ask for an apology. She no longer needed one to know her worth. When the hall began to empty, Ethan found her beside the auction table. Clara thanked him for opening his door. Then she told him the work was finished. She and Lucy would leave Coal Ranch in the morning. Morning came quietly over Coal Ranch. The storm had passed, leaving frost across the fields and a pale sky above the mountains. Inside the upstairs room, Clara folded Lucy's dresses into the same battered suitcase they had carried through the rain. This time, no one was forcing them to leave. Nathan's true will had restored Clara's home and secured Lucy's inheritance. The eastern pasture and its water rights belonged to the child beyond dispute. Clara now had enough money and land to build a life without depending on anyone. That was why she believed she had to go. She would not allow gratitude to become another chain. Ethan had sheltered them when they had nothing, but she did not want to stay simply because she owed him kindness in return. Lucy sat on the bed holding the wool blanket Ethan had given her on their first night. She asked whether they would have to leave Maple behind. Clara said the pony belonged to Coal Ranch. The child lowered her eyes but did not complain. Downstairs, Ethan stood beside 2 cups of coffee. He had seen the suitcase near the door and noticed Clara's shawl was no longer hanging beside his coat. He did not hide the wagon or ask anyone to remove her luggage. He waited. When Clara entered the kitchen, Ethan placed a folded paper before her. It was a work agreement. The contract named Clara as manager of the coal accounts and gave her equal authority over every transaction involving the protected spring. It offered fair wages and a share of the ranch profits, but it did not require her to live in Ethan's house. Clara read every line. He had learned from her that trust should never require blindness. Ethan told her she could sign the agreement, change it, or tear it apart. She could return to Vale Ranch, move to another town, or leave Montana. The choice belonged to her. Then he asked whether Coal Ranch had become a place she wished to call home. Clara looked around the kitchen. She saw the chair Ethan had placed across from his desk when he first began trusting her judgment. 3 plates dried beside the sink. Near the door, his repaired coat hung beside the empty hook where her shawl had been. Outside, Lucy stood near Maple at the corral fence. Clara remembered the night she had arrived, soaked and frightened, asking only for shelter. Ethan had fed Lucy before questioning her. He had returned Nathan's envelope unopened. He had stood at the gate without taking away Clara's voice. When the town finally listened, he had allowed her to speak for herself. Clara placed the contract on the table. She said she did not want to stay because she had nowhere else to go. She wanted to stay because she finally did. Ethan did not reach for her. He waited until Clara crossed the space between them and placed her hand in his. Only then did he close his fingers around hers. Lucy hurried inside, saw the suitcase, and asked whether the upstairs room could remain hers. Ethan said it had belonged to her since the first night she slept there. Lucy wrapped her arms around him. After a shy silence, she called him Pa. The word almost broke the quiet strength Ethan had carried through every hardship. No wedding followed immediately. Nothing was rushed. Clara unpacked one piece of clothing at a time. Ethan gave her keys to the office, barn, and storerooms. Together they restored the stolen money, repaired the northern fence, and reopened the spring channels before summer. The protected water remained available to the smaller ranches, as Samuel and Nathan had intended. Clara began helping local widows and farmers examine contracts before signing them. She could not erase what Silas and Horace had done, but she could make such fraud harder to repeat. Months later, Ethan repaired a gate at sunrise while Lucy rode Maple across the lower pasture. Clara carried 2 cups of coffee through the yard. Cole Ranch had not been saved by force or fortune. It had been saved by a woman the town had called useless, and by a man who offered kindness before he knew what it would return. Clara looked toward the house. It became home the night you opened the door and asked for nothing in return.